Good morning and welcome to another presentation of the DonPotter.net website. Join me in a cup of green tea and a discussion of sight words. If you're a parent with a child that's in first, second grade or kindergarten, or if you're a policymaker, you need to know about the dangers of what I call, or what my friend Sam Blumenfeld has called, the thalidomide of education. Sight words. This is a list that was given to a very dear friend of mine. This is a sight word wall, as they call it, and this is a first grade sight word list. Virtually every student that I tutor has been damaged by the sight word method, and by teaching phonics with the many phonics programs that I have, we're able to cure the sight word guessing habit. We're going to be reading a book by a chapter from Geraldine Rodger's book, The Case for the Prosecution, the trial of silent reading comprehension test charged with the destruction of American schools. Miss Rodgers bases her theory of two kinds of readers on three things. Number one, her experience, 21 and a half years experience in the classroom teaching third graders and first graders, and comparing the third graders she got over the years from sight word programs to the students that she taught in first grade with phonics first, where that her students were all reading better than the third grade students by the middle of first grade, because that she did not teach sight words at all, but only phonics, straight phonics first. We have here, this is why Jacques and Joanna and Jan can read. This is her 1977-78 research where she tested oral reading accuracy with 900 students in several nations, and discovered that there are only two kinds of readers determined by how students first learn to read. This is her book, The Hidden Story, where she studies how American psychologists are implicit in the problems that we've had with reading over the last over 100 years. And then this is her history of reading, which followed her research. 3 large volumes, the history of beginning reading, from teaching sounds to teaching meaning. Let's launch into, we have 10 minutes on our video, so clip here, so let's launch into chapter 2. I would like for you to get this book, follow along with me. Why would anyone in his right mind, this is the title of the chapter, why would anyone in his right mind want to teach sight words anyway? Good question. Sight word trained children have obviously been made almost deaf to print if they are unable to sound out a new word such as gate, that's G-A-T-E, or frog, F-R-O-G, by the beginning of second grade. They're almost as deaf to the sounds of printed words as a stone-deaf person is to the sound of spoken words. That is no accident, because reading experts of the period from 1910 to 1930 carefully arranged it that way by teaching normal children to read as the deaf children are taught, with no reference or almost none to sound. Their dim-witted psychology made them think that this was necessary to protect so-called, and I in quotes, reading comprehension, end quote. A simplistic little diagram in the 1913 Encyclopedia of Education clearly shows why. The article containing the diagram was written by Henry Susela, who was then a professor of education at Columbia Teachers College. He had been E.L. Thorndike's graduate student at Columbia from about 1902. Susela's little diagram, shown below, or in this case up here, is appropriately just like a stimulus response printed circuit, and it is surprisingly easy to understand. In his article published in Encyclopedia in 1913, but obviously written earlier, somewhat earlier, Susela wrote that in listening to language, we travel clockwise on his triangle. On the leg, when we listen from the oral, the sound of the word, directly to the meaning, the meaning of the word. However, in reading, as opposed to listening, if a child has been taught by phonics, they must go clockwise first, from the visual to the oral, which is a visual, which is the side of the print, next to the oral, the sound of the word, and only then reach the last leg, the meaning of the word. Obviously, while listening has only one step in getting to the meaning, to the word meaning, from oral to meaning, listening, phonetic reading inserts that additional step in getting to meaning. First, visual, printed word, second, oral. The phonic sound of the word, and only then the meaning of the word. So here we go. We're going from the visual when we read the word on the page to the oral, and then the meaning. Listening, straight, one step. Reading, two steps. But even the early experts in those days before 1913 wanted to use straight sight words instead of phonics, so children could go counterclockwise from the visual sight word straight to the meaning, skipping sound completely. In other words, from the visual to the meaning, skipping sound altogether. They thought the phonics method made children get hung up on sounds at the oral stop, so that they sometimes never finished the second leg of the trip to the meaning of the word. They'd get hung up here and never get up here. But since sight words were so difficult to memorize, that experts were forced against their will in those early days to use supplemental phonics, not long after the beginning of the first grade. And so, to use the disliked phonics clockwise route on the reading triangle, as well as the preferred sight word counterclockwise route. Something else was worrying them. Educated people actually know at least two languages. One is the vocabulary of the spoken language, and the other, as Dr. Charles C. Walcott pointed out, is the vocabulary of written language, the language of books, which Dr. Walcott called reading 3 to distinguish it from beginning stages of reading. We all know many words and sentences, constructions from our reading which we have never actually spoken aloud. We got their meaning from understanding what we were reading, just as we got vocabulary, the vocabulary of our spoken language from understanding what we were hearing. But if children in their reading were stopped at the oral phonics point of the triangle, if they were often just making sounds and not thinking about the meaning of what they were reading, they would hardly be able to increase their vocabulary. Their education would be ruined. Actually, the experts were getting wildly fluctuating silent reading comprehension scores, like those reported by H.A. Brown in June 1914, Elementary School Journal of the University of Chicago. Brown was Deputy State Superintendent in New Hampshire at the time and had received his master's degree from Columbia Teachers College on June 13, 1912. It is interesting that the oft-quoted pro-sight word classroom experiment reported by Currier and Duggett in the Elementary School Journal in 1916 was done in New Hampshire about the time that Brown was Deputy State Superintendent. But the most interesting individual silent reading comprehension scores were from Miss Middleton's 3rd and 4th grade classroom, reported by Carl Douglas Waldo, a graduate student, University of Chicago, in the Elementary School Journal of January 1915. Some of Miss Middleton's children were scoring very high in the fall, in the fall scored very low in the spring. Some who scored very low in the fall scored very high in the spring. Almost none scored the same, but either went way up or way down, or way up or down, often way up or way down. Any reasonable person might conclude that those high-scoring children in Miss Middleton's class who later scored very low were simply not paying attention, as we can sometimes read the newspaper vacantly and not know what we read. But you have to believe in consciousness before you can believe in attention, because it is consciousness that pays attention. You have to believe in free human will before you decide that anyone can voluntarily choose to pay attention. But neither consciousness or free will existed for most of those enlightened turn-of-the-century psychologists. William James, who had been E.L. Thorndike's professor about 1896 at Harvard, wrote a famous essay in 1904 entitled, "Does Consciousness Exist?" According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, in this essay, James traded in his earlier ideas for a belief in monism, which means he thought the only thing that exists is the material universe. He said, I quote, "The word consciousness is just a loose way of indicating that certain sensory occurrences form part of my life history," end quote. In the spring of 1908, James went to Columbia University to give lectures on pragmatism, his philosophy, on which John Dewey is presumed to have based his own. The Encyclopedia Britannica said that it was as though a new prophet had arrived. His lectures were crowded from first to last with people over